Today, we uncover the shocking truth about modern UK curry sauces. Remember the days when a curry was a proper event, something a little bit special? If you're knocking on a bit, you'll remember the 1970s when the closest most British families got to Indian food was a Vesta curry out of a box. Let's be honest, it didn't exactly look appetizing, but we loved it all the same because it was our first real taste of something exotic, warm and exciting on a cold Friday night. Then came the 1980s. Madhur Jaffrey was on the telly, patiently teaching a whole nation how to cook a proper curry from scratch, and the shops started stocking those authentic curry pastes that came in a proper little tin. You'd crack the lid, and the smell of real spices would drift through the entire house. Cumin, coriander, ginger, that deep golden warmth. That was food you could actually trust. Now walk down the curry aisle of your local supermarket today. What you'll find is a shelf full of jars that look the part, promise the world, and quietly deliver water, modified maize starch, sugar and acidity regulators, all while the price on the label keeps creeping upwards. We're paying more than ever for less and less real food. And some of the numbers are genuinely hard to believe. One supposedly premium supermarket Tikka Masala, sold in an upmarket jar at an upmarket price, contains just 6% tomatoes, with water, which can be added at home, sitting proudly right at the top of the ingredient list when it never did before. One famous celebrity curry brand has just been caught quietly reinventing itself into something that has nothing whatsoever to do with Indian cooking. And the most trusted name brand in British curry has been sold off to an enormous corporation for £200 million and has then lost the one product that knowledgeable home cooks used to swear by. Because for years, the clever advice was simple. Avoid the jars of sauce, they'd say, but the pastes are still worth buying. We used to say exactly the same thing ourselves. Well, as you're about to find out, even that advice is now out of date. And it's honestly one of the saddest turns in this whole story. So we went through the major curry brands sitting on UK supermarket shelves right now, the sauces, the pastes, the celebrity labels and the posh own brands, and we held every one of them up against its own ingredient list, its price, and the memories of the people who've been buying them for decades. And we're going to count down 8 brands we reckon you should leave right where they are on the shelf, and then reveal 4 that are genuinely still worth buying. Whether you're looking for that long familiar BIR experience, or something much more closer to that authentic taste. But before we dive in, please do us one small favor. Hit that hype button underneath this video. It costs you absolutely nothing, but it shoves this investigation in front of far more British families. And that's exactly how ordinary shoppers push back and start voting with their wallets. When enough of us make a bit of noise, these companies have no choice but to listen. A quick like helps too, and it tells us you want more of these deep dives into what's really going into the food we all buy without thinking. So put the kettle on, get yourself comfortable, and let's take a proper honest look at what's really hiding inside those curry jars. And let's get into it. Number 8. Loyd Grossman. For a certain generation, that name brings back Sunday nights in front of the telly, a familiar voice with a very particular accent poking around other people's houses. And somewhere along the way, that same face ended up on a jar of curry sauce. And the assumption we were all meant to make was obvious. Surely a famous food presenter wouldn't just stick his name on anything, right? It felt personal. It felt like an endorsement you could totally rely on. The reality is a good deal less romantic. The Loyd Grossman range isn't cooked up in some specialty kitchen. It's owned and produced by Premier Foods, one of the biggest bulk factory food operations in the country, and it's a company you'll see cropping up again and again as you go down the rabbit hole. This isn't a chef's labor of love. It's a brand name, a license, a business deal, and a face on a label. And here's the detail that gives the whole game away. This range only landed on British shelves in 1995, and in July 2005, it quietly marked its 30th birthday with a shiny new jar line. And in July 26, that pattern became impossible to ignore. Premier Foods announced it was stretching the Loyd Grossman name well beyond its curry and pasta jars, launching a new range of 3-pouch pasta sauce kits and rice kits rolled out through Tesco. Now, there's nothing wrong with a rice kit, but stop and think about what it tells you. It's a brand that built its reputation purely on a chef building an authentic Indian curry from scratch right at home. So how have they managed to stretch that into whatever category the marketing department fancies next, turning people further and further away from learning how to cook anything at all, even boiling their own rice? The only thing that's telling us is the name was never really about curry expertise at all. It's a convenient badge to slap on whatever the factory is producing this quarter. That's the problem with buying a personality instead of a recipe. When the sauce itself is just another ambient jar off the same production lines as a dozen other Premier Foods curries, you're paying a premium for a memory of a television show, not for a better curry. Hold the ingredients up next to a genuine curry house chef, and the gap becomes obvious very quickly. There are far more honest jars on the shelf, and several of them cost less. This one leans almost entirely on the warmth you feel towards the celebrity forename, and that's exactly why it starts our list. Number 7. Patak's. This one genuinely hurts to include because for a lot of us, Patak's was the real thing. Many of you will remember the old tins, the way the paste actually smelled of proper spice the moment you opened it, the feeling that this was a family firm that knew exactly what it was doing. The Patak family built something special, and for decades it was the name you trusted when you couldn't cook from scratch. Then, back in 2007, the brand was sold to the food giant Associated British Foods for a reported £200 million. And this is where we have to be completely honest with you, because it means correcting something we've said ourselves in the past. For years, the accepted wisdom among knowledgeable home cooks was clear. The Patak's jarred sauces had already gone downhill, watered down and thin. But the pastes were still the secret weapon. Buy the paste, build your own sauce, and you'd be fine. That was the advice. We gave it too. We can't give it any longer. According to a wave of recent consumer reviews, even the beloved pastes have now slipped. Longtime buyers describe the current jars as swimming in oil, unpleasantly sharp and vinegary, and lacking the deep spice punch they remember. Now, reviews are reviews. They're the honest reactions of people who've bought this product for years. Not a laboratory report, but when the very customers who used to defend a product to the hilt start turning on it in these kinds of numbers. It tells you something has changed in the jar. The current Tikka Masala paste leads with water and ground spices, with rapeseed oil, salt and maize flour close behind, and turmeric doing a lot of the color work. It isn't a disaster on paper, but it's a world away from the aromatic, oily, in a good way pastes that older cooks fell in love with. And look at what the company has actually been pouring its energy into lately. In July 2025, Patak's teamed up with another factory operation to push out a chilled Indian meal range, and by that November, it had launched 13 brand new products through Tesco alone. Sauces, toppers, meal kits, the lot. Then, in April 2026, parent company Associated British Foods announced it was splitting off Primark and folding Patak's into a standalone food business. That is an awful lot of boardroom shuffling and product launching. What you won't find anywhere in the middle of all that activity is a single promise to put the Old Spice depth back into the jar. And it's worth remembering that this is a brand that had to urgently pull one of its products back in 2024 over fears of tiny glass fragments. That was a jar of pickle, not the curry sauce, so nobody needs to panic, but it's hardly the hallmark of the careful little family operation people still picture in their heads. Do you remember the old Patak's tins? Are you a proud scratch cook who wouldn't touch a jar with a barge pole? Let us know down in the comments. This is exactly the kind of thing we love hearing from you about. The saddest part of this whole story is that the last genuinely good thing Patak's made appears to have finally been dragged down to the level of everything else. Number 6. Sharwood's. Here's another name with real history behind it. Sharwood's has been bringing the flavors of India and the Far East into British kitchens since the 1800s. And for generations, that label felt like a safe, dependable choice. If you grew up with a jar of Sharwoods in the cupboard and a packet of their poppadoms alongside it, you'll know exactly what I mean. And here's the part you might not realize. Sharwood's is another brand sitting under the Premier Foods umbrella, the same company behind the celebrity label we just talked about. That's not a coincidence you should ignore. When one giant factory operation owns a whole shelf of once proud names, the priority stops being tradition and quietly becomes cost. It's a big part of what a lot of people are now calling the enshittification of our food, the slow, steady stripping out of quality from the things we grew up trusting. Take a proper look at the current Tikka Masala cooking sauce. After the water and the tomatoes, one of the very next things you'll find on that list is sugar, sitting higher up than the double cream the sauce is supposedly built around. Then comes the modified maize starch, doing the heavy lifting to give you that thick, glossy coating that looks rich but tells you very little about what's actually in there. It's a formula that's been carefully engineered to hit a price point, not to recreate the flavor of a proper restaurant curry. And it isn't only home cooks quietly turning away. Will Murray, a chef who's cooked at 2 Michelin-starred level and now runs some of London's most talked-about restaurants, recently went public with his own supermarket habits, and he named both Sharwood's and Patak's as jars he steers well clear of. His advice? You're honestly better off grabbing a plain supermarket own brand and livening it up with a few fresh bits from a local deli. When a chef of that caliber would rather build his own from scratch than trust a heritage name like this that tells you exactly how far the recipe has drifted from what it once stood for. None of this makes Sharwood's the very worst offender on the shelf, and it isn't dangerous. But for a heritage brand that once genuinely meant something, leaning on sugar and thickeners to carry a curry is a disappointing place to end up. You're buying the memory of a good name, and the recipe simply doesn't live up to it anymore. Number 5. Tesco Everyday Value Curry Sauce. Now, we need to be fair here, because this one is at least honest about what it is. This is the rock-bottom budget sauce. These days you'll find it rebranded under the Hearty Food Co. name, and it sells for around 49 pence a jar. For a family counting every single penny, that price genuinely feels like a lifeline, and we would never criticize anyone for reaching for it. But you deserve to know exactly what you're getting for your money. The first ingredient is water. The tomato content is a modest 9%. Not far behind sits the modified maize starch and the sugar, with a scattering of sultanas thrown in for a bit of sweetness. There are no serious aromatics doing any real work here, just a whisper of cheap curry flavoring stretched across a lot of thickened water. The result is a sauce that doesn't so much coat your chicken as congeal around it. Plenty of people describe that gloopy, claggy texture in far less polite terms than I'll use here. Let's just say it clings to your food more like a curry-flavored paste than a proper sauce. It fills a plate, and on a tight budget that absolutely counts for something. The real reason for including it isn't to sneer at a cheap jar, it's to set the baseline. This is what water, starch and sugar honestly taste like when nobody's pretending otherwise. Keep that firmly in mind, because the truly frustrating part of this list is the brands that serve you almost exactly the same thing and charge you 3 or 4 times as much for the privilege. Number 4. Ben's Original. You'll know this one better under its old name, but the branding was changed a few years back, and the jars and pouches now sit in almost every supermarket in the country. What plenty of shoppers don't stop to think about is who actually makes it. Ben's Original is owned by Mars, yes, the same global confectionery giant behind the chocolate bars, and that matters more than you'd expect. When a company that has spent a century perfecting sweet, mass-market treats turns its hand to a savory curry, it brings a very particular instinct along with it. The goal isn't to recreate the smoky, spiced complexity of a restaurant curry. The goal is to make something completely inoffensive that appeals to the widest possible audience, children very much included. The spices are kept gentle, all the sharp edges are smoothed off, and the whole thing is engineered to be safe and easy rather than genuinely exciting. Look at the medium curry sauce and you'll see it plays out exactly as you'd guess. It's built on water and tomatoes, with a bit of onion and red pepper, thickened and finished with sunflower oil, and sugar sitting comfortably in the mix. In fairness, it isn't drowning in sugar the way 1 or 2 other jars are, but it's a sweet, mild, thoroughly rounded-off sauce that tastes more like a gentle tomato base than a real curry. For a quick midweek meal that the kids won't grumble about, it does a job. But if you grew up with the real aromatic stuff and you're hoping for a bit of proper depth and heat, this one is going to leave you cold. It's a curry designed by a sweet-tooth committee, and honestly, you can taste it. Number 3. Waitrose Tikka Masala. Now we climb up the supermarket ladder, and this is where it really starts to sting. Waitrose has built its entire reputation on being the upmarket, quality-first supermarket, the place you go when you want the good stuff and you're happy to pay a little more for it. So you'd naturally assume their Tikka Masala cooking sauce would be a genuine cut above the rest. You might reasonably expect a jar packed with tomatoes, cream, and real spice. The current ingredient list tells a rather different story. Open up the Waitrose Tikka Masala cooking sauce, and the very first ingredient is water. After that comes a bit of single cream at 7%, and then, brace yourself, tomatoes at just 6%, with a splash more tomato puree and a little yogurt on top. 6% tomatoes in a tomato-based curry sauce from the supermarket that trades on being the premium option in the country. The rest of the jar does the familiar routine: rapeseed oil, sugar, modified maize starch to thicken it all up, and lactic acid to keep it stable on the shelf. Strip away the smart packaging and the reassuring branding, and what you're left with is a water-first, starch-thickened budget formula wearing a very expensive suit. That, in a way, makes this one worse than the honest 49p jar we looked at a moment ago. The cheap sauce never pretended to be anything other than cheap. Here, you're being asked to pay a premium price on the strength of a premium name, and the actual recipe inside isn't a world away from the budget shelf. The reputation is doing an enormous amount of the heavy lifting, and the label simply doesn't back it up. And the timing makes it sting all the more. Grocery inflation has actually been easing lately, down to under 2% by the middle of 2026, with the supermarkets falling over themselves to launch promotions and win back cautious shoppers. So there's no longer even the excuse of runaway costs. When a jar still leads with water and offers you 6% tomatoes at a premium price, in that kind of climate, that's a deliberate choice, not a necessity. Number 2. Home Pride. If any brand ought to stand for solid, no-nonsense British dependability, it's this one. Fred, the little bowler-hatted flour grader, has been a fixture of British kitchens for decades. And that friendly cartoon face was practically a promise all on its own. Home Pride was the brand your mum trusted. It felt as safe as houses, which makes what's happened to the cooking sauces all the more disappointing. Open a jar of the curry sauce today, and once again, the very first ingredient you'll find is water. Look a little further down the list, and sugar turns up far higher than you'd ever want it to in something you're serving as a savory dinner. This is a curry sauce that carries a genuinely surprising amount of sweetness, backed up with modified maize starch to give it body. It ends up tasting less like a spiced curry and more like a sweet, thickened tomato soup with a bit of mild curry powder stirred through it. And here's what really tells you where the brand's head is at these days. In July 2026, Home Pride wasn't pouring its energy into fixing its curries or chasing a bit of genuine authenticity. It was busy launching a trendy new Marry Me chicken pasta bake sauce and running a passport to flavor promotion across its packs. The marketing machine is working overtime, the recipe in the jar is standing perfectly still. And this is the frustrating pattern right across so many of these legacy names. Whenever there's a bit of budget and imagination going spare, it gets spent chasing whatever flavor is trending online this month, never on quietly putting the depth back into the sauce that families have leaned on for decades. The launches come thick and fast. The actual jar of curry gets left exactly where it was. That's the real disappointment here. A brand built on the trust of British families, coasting along on nostalgia and a friendly cartoon, while the thing inside the jar quietly becomes a sugary, starchy shadow of what that name used to promise. You're buying Fred's good reputation, and Fred, frankly, deserves better than what's ended up in that sauce. Number 1. Asda Extra Special. We've saved the biggest lesson of the whole list for last, and it isn't really about one single jar. It's about the most seductive trick in the entire supermarket: the premium own-label promise. Asda's extra special range, which the supermarket is now busy rebranding as exceptional by Asda, is the perfect example of it. Beautiful packaging, flowery restaurant-style descriptions right across the front. Words like hand-finished and slow-cooked and authentic, all doing exactly what they're designed to do, which is make you feel that you're treating yourself and your family to something genuinely special. And you're paying handsomely for that feeling. The whole point of a premium own-label tier is that it sits a good deal above the standard range on price, and the promise on the packaging is that you're getting a completely different class of food for the extra money. Here's the uncomfortable question you should always ask right across the market and not just at one shop. Turn that fancy jar around and read the actual ingredients on the back. Time and time again, premium own-label curry sauces lean on the very same foundations as the cheap stuff. Water near the top, tomato paste, rapeseed oil, sugar and modified maize starch doing all the thickening. The flowery language on the front of the jar and the plain reality on the back of it can be surprisingly far apart. The recipe hasn't necessarily leapt up a whole division to match the price, the packaging and the poetry have. And think about what that flowery front label is really doing. Words like hand-finished and slow-cooked aren't measured, they aren't regulated the way an ingredient list is, and they cost the factory almost nothing to print. The industry has even clocked the trend. Shoppers are increasingly reaching past the standard jar for the posh-looking one, and the marketing teams know it perfectly well. That's precisely why the poetry on the front keeps getting fancier while the recipe on the back quietly stays put. That's why this sits at number 1. Not because it's the most dangerous thing on the shelf. It isn't, but because it's the con that catches out the most careful, well-meaning shoppers of all. The people trying to buy a bit better, trying to treat their family, reaching past the budget jar for the posh, one in good faith. The single most valuable habit you can possibly build is a simple one. Ignore the front of the jar completely, turn it over, and let the ingredient list tell you the truth. Because a premium price tag is a marketing decision, and it is not the same thing as a premium recipe. So, if Friday night is still curry night, and you're either knocking on a bit or you simply don't have 3 hours to simmer a base gravy from scratch, what should you actually be reaching for? The rules are far simpler than the marketing wants you to believe. Turn the jar or the pack over and look for real separated spices rather than a vague dusting of curry powder. Look for a proper concentrated base, the kind the trade calls a taka, where tomatoes, fried onions, garlic and ginger come before water on the list. And be a little wary of any jar whose main selling point is a famous face or a fancy adjective. The good news is that there are still some genuinely excellent options out there, so here are 4 that thoroughly earn their place on your shelf. First, the Spice Tailor. This is the brand that cracked the format completely. Instead of 1 jar of pre-mixed gloop, you get a proper little kit, a pouch of whole spices, a base sauce, so the flavors are built in stages, the way a real cook would do it, and the results are streets ahead of anything you'll ever pour out of a standard jar. It was founded by the cook and writer Anjum Anand as a genuinely authentic alternative, and it really shows. There's one honest note of caution though, and it's the reason we mention it, rather than simply cheer. Back in 2022, the Spice Tailor was bought by Premier Foods, the very company behind several of the brands we've just warned you about. For now, the kits remain excellent, and it's become the fastest-growing ambient meal kit in the whole country, up more than 17% in a single year, with Premier Foods now busy stretching the name well beyond India into Japanese, Korean, and Mexican kits too. But rapid expansion under a giant owner is exactly the moment quality can quietly start to wobble, so enjoy it and keep half an eye on those labels over the coming years, because we've all seen how this particular story tends to go. Second, the Agra Taka pastes. Now this is what a curry base is actually supposed to look like. Agra is a well-respected Yorkshire restaurant group with genuine Kashmiri roots, and their Taka pastes are essentially a bottled version of the concentrated base they build a curry on in their own kitchens. Turn the jar over and the difference is night and day. Instead of water, you'll find the list led by diced tomatoes and fried onions, with rapeseed oil, garlic, ginger and real spices doing the work. No palm oil, no artificial sweeteners, just a proper foundation. They've recently added a vegan-friendly butter chicken version too, and you'll now find them in the likes of Tesco, Asda, and Morrison's. Add your own meat or vegetables and a splash of cream, and you're suddenly eating something that tastes like it came from an actual restaurant. Third, and this is the one the real bargain hunters already know all about, Indie Grand. These are the humble little foil pouches made by Panazar Foods over in the West Midlands, and you'll mostly find them tucked away in discount shops like Home Bargains and Aldi, rather than up on the main supermarket shelves. Don't let the modest packaging fool you for a second. These deliver a genuine British Indian restaurant-style base, the kind of deep, savoury flavour you actually get from your local takeaway, with onion, tomato and real cream sitting high up the list. For the money, there is honestly very little on any shelf anywhere that beats them. And stumbling on a stack of them in your local discount store feels like a proper little victory. And fourth, if you really want to treat yourself, Gymkhana Fine Foods. Yes, we'll be honest about the price straight away. It's around £6.75 for a jar, which is a serious step up from everything else here. But this is the real article. Gymkhana comes from the acclaimed London restaurant group of the same name, and it shows absolutely no interest in the cheap fillers that plague the rest of the aisle. You get Kashmiri chili, mellow coconut milk, proper butter and cream, and none of that water and starch trickery propping it up. It's earned some serious praise from Michelin star chefs who happily recommend it as restaurant quality straight out of a jar, and having expanded into hundreds more Tesco stores this year, it's easier to get hold of than ever. For a special Friday night when you want the taste of a proper restaurant without the restaurant bill, it's genuinely worth every penny. Before we wrap up, if you found this useful, do think about subscribing, because we're steadily working our way through the whole supermarket, aisle by aisle, exposing exactly what's really in the food we all buy without a second thought. So there you have it. 8 jars to leave right where they are, and 4 that genuinely deserve a spot in your basket. Give this video a quick like if it helped, tap that hype button to get it in front of more families who need to see it, and drop us a comment telling us which food or product category we should investigate next. Until next time, read your labels, trust your taste buds, and protect your plate.